Hey guys, welcome back. A few weeks ago I did a kind of impromptu video on setting the intonation on your Cigar box guitar with one of these hardtail bridges with the individual saddle pieces. I'll include a link to that video in the notes below. But since then I pinched a nerve in my L5 vertebrae, which is kind of an annual event, and so I'm not building very much and not able to sit for too long to play. So I thought I'd offer up this time to go over the rest of that story, which is setting your string height, or action. Now, if you're just jumping in and starting out building your first CBG, you're probably going to be excited just to have it making sound and making music on it, and that's great. That's what it's all about. But chances are you're going to want to make another one after that, or you're going to want to play it a lot. And that means you're probably going to start to notice some things you like about it and some things that you don't so much like about it. So I'm going to try to share the insight that I've learned and give you some recommendations that will get you the results you want. So first I'll go over the principles of string action, then how to measure the string height, how to set and adjust it, and finally just a quick word about fretless instruments or slide playing. But spoiler alert, I'm going to do a third video specifically about setting the string action for slide playing, and I'll include a link to that once that one is up. Okay. Now when we hear folks talking about string height or action, the first thing we're probably thinking is we want something comfortable to play. And maybe we're thinking about this style of music that we want to play. Maybe we're strumming away on chords, or maybe we want to play lead solos. And this is where I really like that term action. When I first started building, I didn't really know why people call it action. But since then, I've come to think about it more and more as what we're doing to the string when we play, and especially what the string is doing after that. And that's basically vibrating. In the CBG world, we like to say there are no rules, but there is a law. It's called physics, and it'll sit you down in a hurry if you don't respect it. So let's look at what happens when that string is vibrating. Now, if you think about the instrument from the top, when you pick or strum the strings, you're doing it from the side, right? But the strings contact the instrument by the saddle and the nut on the underside of the string. So we've got two different things going on here, and that means that when you pick or strum, you're setting the string into an elliptical motion. Now, after you pick or strum, the guitar takes over at the nut and the saddle, the tension takes over, and that vibration turns into more of a vertical motion up and down. Now, the most that string vibrates up and down is called amplitude. And if you think about it, the most tension on your guitar is where the string connects to the bridge and is pulled over the saddle, and at the other end where the tuners pull the string over the nut. So of course, if you take the string and pinch it, try to give it a little wiggle, it doesn't move much, right? Where does it move the most? Of course, in the middle, where it's most flexible. And what's the middle of your instrument? That's right, the 12th fret. So that means around the 12th fret is where that string is vibrating the most, where it has the most amplitude, and that means the most chance for knocking against your frets and making a whole lot of unwanted noise. And now you start to see where we're going. Now, different strings have different amplitude for a variety of different reasons. First off, there are different gauges of strings, right? So different thickness, different weights. Different materials. Bronze strings are heavier than nickel strings. Flat wound strings are a lot heavier than round wound strings. And I've got a funny story about that if you ever want to ask me someday. Different tunings put different tension on the strings, and different scale lengths have different tension. So there are all these different reasons for the strings vibrating differently, but one thing is constant, and that is on any guitar, the treble strings, or in music we call them the top strings, have lower amplitude than the bass strings or bottom strings. And that's because those treble strings, those top strings, have less material. They're unwound. And they're at a higher tension because they're tuned to a higher pitch. So that means they're not vibrating up and down as far as the bass strings, which have a lot more material, so more weight is being moved up and down. And bass strings are under lower tension because they're tuned to bass notes. So when you pick a bass string, it's going to flop up and down on that fingerboard like a coho salmon at the bottom of a bucket at Montrose Harbor. So there are two things we have to think about. One is, of course, we might want to set those strings as low as possible, but we have to set them high enough so that they're not going to make contact with the frets. And we want to set the bass strings, the bottom strings, higher than the treble side strings, because those bass strings have a higher amplitude. They move up and down more than on the treble side. So when we think about it this way, it makes sense to start setting our action with the outside strings, the far opposite top treble string and bottom bass string. And then set the middle strings so that we have a nice graduated transition across the fingerboard. So how do we measure the string height? Well, first remember that the string is vibrating up and down the most, or has the most amplitude, in the middle at the 12th fret. So that's where we want to measure the height. And we want to measure from the top of the fret, we say the crown or the peak of the fret, up to the underside of the string. Now, of course, most of the reference information out there is for 6-string guitar. That's the industry standard. And the general rule of thumb is we want that top treble E string 1/16 of an inch above the 12th fret. And for that bottom bass E string, we want that about 5/64, 3/32 of an inch above the 12th fret. Now we say general rule of thumb because it depends on how heavy gauge strings you're using, and especially on your playing style. If you have a really light touch and you're not really hitting the strings too hard, they're not vibrating too much, you might be able to go a little bit lower. If you have a heavier touch, if you hit the strings hard when you're strumming or picking, then you probably want to stay with that standard reference, or maybe even a little bit higher. So, folks have a whole bunch of different ways for measuring that height. Some use a grassroots method of spare change in their pocket. Turns out that a quarter is 1/16 of an inch thick. So if you just have a quarter and you place it right on the top of that 12th fret, then you want to just set your top treble string just against the top surface of the quarter, and you've got your 1/16 of an inch. I don't have one on hand, but I'm told a nickel is about 5/64. So if you have a nickel, then for the bass side, same thing, set it on top of the fret and set your bass bottom string right up on the top of that. And that should pretty much get you in the ballpark. I like to be a little bit more precise, which is like saying Chicago can be a little nippy in February. I like to use a ruler that's marked in 64ths of an inch. And so make sure you set the ruler on top of the fret, on top of the 12th fret, behind the string so that you can see the string in front of the ruler. And of course, you're going to want to measure the string right to about 1/16 of an inch for the top treble string. And then move the ruler behind the bottom bass string so that you can see the string in front, and again about 5/64, 3/32 of an inch. A lot of the big guitar building supply houses out there make these handy string height measurement guides that have pre-marked increments that go up higher for the bass strings. So there, of course, same thing. You're going to place that on the crown of the fret, and now you just line up the string with the mark, and then you can move back up the strings to the bass string, and of course you go up each increment higher. If you don't have one of these, I've even taken a piece of bone saddle blank, or you can take like a corian or plastic, even hardwood, I guess, and I'll measure 1/16 of an inch at one end and about 3/32 at the other end, and I'll sand it to that angle, to that sort of wedge shape. Then you can pretty much just slide it under your strings until the strings are sitting all just on top of that guide, and you know that you've got all your strings evenly graduated and you're pretty much good to go. So you know the action you want, but how do you set or adjust the height of the strings? Well, that depends on the kind of bridge or saddle that you're going to use. And we know that folks in the CBG world use all kinds of different materials for a bridge saddle, all the way from skeleton keys to threaded bolt to carving a piece of wood or bone. And of course, our deluxe fancy schmancy hardtail bridge with the individually adjustable saddles. Now, if you're going to go with a found object like a skeleton key, I recommend making a wooden base and that you're going to lay that key on, right? So of course you're going to measure the thickness or height of the key, and then you're going to need to figure out how high you need that wood base to be at its highest point. That's the bottom bass string point. And then you're going to sand down to the low point for that top treble string. And I recommend you take a little bit off, put the key, slide it under, check the height, and then take a little bit more as you need to, and work gradually, because it's always easier to take material away than to put it back on. Now you can do the same thing if you're using a threaded bolt, but nowadays I usually like to find a bolt and nut that are the height of the bass string, right, the highest point. And then I'll file the nut down on the treble side and use that as the foot, so that when I set the foot of that nut down, then I know it's sitting down on the angle I need. Of course, if you're using carved wood or bone saddle, then of course you're going to want to measure the height for your treble side, your bass side, and then cut or sand down to make that angle. And of course, again, you always want to go nice and gradually and check a little bit in between each time. It's hard to put wood back. It's much easier to take it away. Or if you decide to go with the hardtail bridge and individually adjustable saddles, pretty much does the job for you, right? Just know that each of these saddles has 2 set screws on either side, and that's to keep the saddle nice and level and not tilted to one side or the other. So with these, you use an Allen key, and you're going to want to turn the screws equally, right? Again, to keep that saddle piece nice and level. And when you turn right, you're raising the saddle. When you turn it left, you're lowering. And I always recommend keep track of your turns, right? Measure your turns in quarter, half, or full turns. That way, you know how much you're adjusting each saddle relative to the others, and you can always even go back if you need to lower one or raise one a little bit. Now, whichever type of ridge you decide to go with, the most important thing to remember is this. The strings are not parallel to the fingerboard. They actually form a triangle with the lowest point at the nut and the highest point up at the saddle. That means that at the 12th thread in the middle, that's half the height as at the saddle, right? I'll put up a picture to make it clear. But that means that when you want to make an adjustment to the height at the 12th fret, you're going to need to double that amount at the saddle. So if you want to raise your action a 32nd of an inch at the 12th fret, you need to raise the saddle a 16th of an inch. If you want to raise the height a 16th of an inch at the 12th fret, then you're going to go an 1/8 of an inch at the saddle, and so on. Okay, that about covers it for this video. I really hope it helps you if you're just starting out building, and if you've been building for a while, I hope it gives you some useful tips for things that maybe you haven't thought about in these ways. Either way, if you like it, please hit the like button, subscribe, share it with your friends. That all really helps me out. I'll make sure to post a link to that part 3 video down in the notes section once it's done. And until then, thanks for watching. Please take care of yourselves and each other. Bye-bye.